So we reviewed all that was said in that meeting, and there are a couple of, and I would hope that you all will add to this, folks who were there.
You're doing fine.
Jeff and Mr. Scaff, Mr. Hackbart, Mr. Scaff, myself, and Mr. Hewitt, and who else?
Tom Bradley.
Tom.
Bradley.
Oh yeah, Mr. Bradley from our own staff were there, and Tom's got some background in stormwater. So we all listened and learned a lot from this first presentation by these folks who have background in this, and we came back to thinking of some of the big building blocks. You know, one would be the task force, another would be the consultant that the commission asked us to hire in the last meeting, and we had decided internally that the consultant would logically work under the sewer department, and then we went on to decide that the specs for this job, of course, would be written by Mr. Scout, and with assistance from Jeff and Tom. And so then we took what they shared with us, and we came up with we tweaked it a little bit to suit what we hope will suit the city of Franklin. And then we met this morning to draft this. See, such a nice.
We have a plan.
Well,
this is huge.
I told you we put a lot of work in 2 weeks. You know, we haven't been resting. We've been working. So we met just this morning. Ink's still wet on this document, so it's somewhat in draft format, but we think it's probably about 92.5% where it ought to be. Is that good to say?
That's right. Over 90.
So I know there's a lot for you to be exposed to at first glance, but we do think it's a successful route that we could take. And Bill and Jeff, do you all want to add to this, or how would the commission? Would you like us just to start down the line and comment a little bit about the sequence and chronological order and why we feel like it would be successful if we took this? Okay. Do you want to do that, or you want me to do that?
Your pleasure, sir.
Okay. I like this stuff. I like water. Water's so essential. Okay, let's just start. We've got it broken down in 3 phases. And what we have to understand based on history and based on successful startups, we're probably talking about anywhere from 16, 18 months to 24 months.
Or longer.
Or longer. So there's a lot of legal issues involved here too. And there are a lot of stakeholders, and if we're going to do it right, it's going to take a lengthy time for us to unfold all this. But the longest journey starts with the first step. So I'm excited.
And if I may interject, if the more we try to compress that, in my opinion, the more chance we have of failure to do it right.
Okay, so let's jump into phase 1, and of course, we talked about wanting the county to be our partner, and so we would want to. I think they have some of the county elected officials have expressed that they're on board early, informally, but we would need to we would need to formalize that, and, you know, that would require us to, you know, have some discussions with the county fiscal court. And so then, we feel like it'd be very important to get this consultant on board early. So, you know, number 2 would be get the consultant on board. Number 3, we want to form a tighter internal staff technical advisory committee. And then number 4 is very important. Of course, all these are important, but number 4 is very important, to find out what the needs are, the actual needs. And I think this would require an actual contracted service, is that right?
That's where we would bring in the consultant to assist us in doing that needs analysis.
Would that be projects, when you say needs, specifically capital projects, or needs in terms of?
The projects, I think, would be a small component of it, but it would be a component, but it's looking at, if you remember that first phase that they had that had like 15 or 18, you know, how you gonna bill it, how you gonna structure it, all those type things.
Needs.
Looking at all those things and coming up with all the different options that are available. Implementation needs. And that's what it is, an implementation analysis.
Moving on to number 5, program development with review of the different options. There's several different options that we could take and accept and implement. And Mr. Moore has some background in that, and we would ask him to further research those different options. They're complicated. Number 6, then by then we would have a considerable amount of data and research. We'd want to make a formal presentation to the Board of Commissioners as well as the Franklin County Fiscal Court. Then we would be ready for phase number 2, and that's where we'd actually form the stakeholder group, and that would be done through a resolution or an order. Could either one of those work, or would it have to be a resolution?
Well, we did the code enforcement task force through resolution, and that would probably be the right way, because an order really just only affects the internal workings of the city, whereas a resolution would affect, I assume that stakeholders are going to include people outside the city. So I think the resolution would be the appropriate one.
Okay, then we're to number 2, and it's another important one, what level of services, and the level of service would drive the cost. So you could do a Mercedes of a program, or you could do a Chevrolet or a Kia or some other
Let's get a hybrid.
hybrid. You go. So that you know, in all seriousness, that's a very important decision about what level of service are you going to go after. Then number 3 is rate review options, and you know, estimates of needs and revenues. Then number 4 is another very important one, is figuring out our billing options. Roughly speaking, just in this time period, I mean, where we are now, there are several different options that we might go with, depending on what kind of proposal maybe that the plant board comes with. It might be possible to bill it through the plant board. Then another option would be us to bill it here at home, do our own billing. And the third option would be some third-party billing
Other
service.
than the plant.
Other than the plant board. Then number 6, we would, very important thing, get public involvement and the education program. It would take an extensive education program, and and probably a lengthy amount of time to do a proper education program. And then we'd be back to making a second formal presentation to the combined commission and fiscal court. Then we'd be ready for phase 3, which would be the implementation phase, and decisions by the governing bodies, and additional education program notification of activities, and then actual concrete contract with the billing entity. And then we would have a public hearing and talk about all the plans and the expected rate and the billing process. So that's a first blush. We know there's a lot more to it, but we're open to, or if y'all would like to add some things, Mr. Hackbarth.
Some of the things we discussed in our meetings on Friday, I wasn't able to attend this morning's meeting, but the time period, there's not one really attached to this, but generally we were talking, we were told about a 2-year period of time it takes to go through this process, so that's just one thing to.
We're facing a federal mandate within 4 years, is that right?
No, we have that today. We had that in 2003, an unfunded mandate with our stormwater quality program, our permit. That
Are you
was
speaking of the funding
2003.
aspect of it?
I
Yes.
thought,
Funding requirement? He's
Yeah.
talking about, I think, the funding, specifically,
Yes.
the funding requirement of the new permit.
Our new permit, which we're in the first year of a 5-year permit, requires the city to identify a funding source for our stormwater program. So we have 4 more years left in our current permit to identify a funding source to run our program.
And moving along in this plan would keep us in compliance with that.
That's correct.
and you can't wait, 6 months before that expires. You can't wait up to that time, then it's too late. Other general comments or guidance?
We have done a feasibility study back in 2003 or 4, and we looked at all the different parcels in Franklin County and the city, and the watershed that we're in, I think it was identified as 60% of the runoff that came from government-owned properties. So, one way, it's a way of reducing residential property tax by unloading some of that burden onto property that is currently paying no property tax based on runoff and impervious surface. So that's one thing that really was brought out of that study, that we're unique, other than that our property tax exemptions would not apply to this fee.
We're also sort of unique in that we're the second smallest capital city in the United States, and we have a very large amount of stormwater activity with our state government sites. And then there are a lot of other big stakeholders like the churches and the schools and
Federal government buildings.
federal government and all kinds of government buildings. And the question came up is, do we pay our own, does the city have a stormwater bill that we will have to pay? So that's something we'll have to research too. So there are a lot of nuances that maybe you don't think of at first.